Right, you can see there from the package, it has been a sitting day, another busy one. Joining me now to discuss this and more and those stories is Deputy Executive Director at the IPA, Daniel Wild, and National Affairs Editor at the Daily Telegraph, of course, one of our own, James Morrow. The coalition rift will sadly have to start there again tonight. Susan Lee persisting with her ultimatum. She wants those 3 National Party senators who crossed the floor to remain out of shadow cabinet for at least 6 months. Have a listen.
The coalition can reform this week with conditions that are supported by the overwhelming majority of my party room.
I said before that these 3 senators being reinstated to shadow cabinet was a non-negotiable. Is that still your position? It's a hard no to a coalition unless they're brought back.
We've been very clear on that because I don't know whether you just heard me before, but we did nothing wrong.
Well, Dan, I'll say this again as a former secretary to shadow cabinet under 3 Liberal leaders. The Nats were right in what they did. The Liberals were not. There was a split in the parties. They did not take that shadow cabinet decision back to the joint party room to resolve. Susan Lee didn't follow the precedents. She's now put a deadline on reunification. She says if they are not back together by Monday, she'll announce her new shadow cabinet, beg your pardon. It'll be Libs only. But, mate, if she does that, it's going to be even harder for them to reunite.
Well, that's right, Peter. You're spot on. The Nationals did the right thing on the hate crime laws, and especially those Nationals that voted no in the Senate, namely Bridget McKenzie and Ross Goodell, Susan McDonald, Matt Canavan, who voted no. I mean, they did the right thing by the country, by their party, by the constituents, and the Liberal Party got it wrong. And, you know, you go into the details on the machinations of what the process should be. And if we also just look at the policy substance, well, how can the Liberals now say, well, you're going to be in the sin bin for 6 months? I mean, this is like kindergarten stuff. You've got to go sit in the corner and sit at the wall. Australians are just over this. They want an opposition, a full-blooded centre-right opposition that's actually going to stand up for mainstream Australian values and talk about the issues that we care about, exactly as you were talking about in your editorial, whether it's mass migration, whether it's the net zero policies, whether it's the economy falling over. That's what Australians want the coalition focused on. But instead, they're just enmeshed in this intractable issue of, you know, who can do this and who can do that and how they're going to get back together. I just don't see there's going to be any resolution in the near future. And I just want to reiterate, how can you punish these national senators for doing the right thing for the country? It's just bizarre.
Yeah, and I think people in Canberra should be asking Susan Lee, I know certainly colleagues are, Liberal colleagues, James, they're asking her, well, hang on, if you had a split in your shadow cabinet, if the Nats had a clear position to oppose the bills, you were moving on to agree with them with amendments. If you had a split in the room, which you did, why didn't you take it to a joint party room meeting? I've seen messages from her colleagues, her Liberal MPs, who were waiting around for hours on end for a joint party room meeting that was never called to resolve this issue. So to try and put it on the Nats now and to try and keep them in the sin bin for 6 months, I think it's crackers. And I think absolutely, as Dan says, people are angry. The community wants the Liberals and the Nats focused on the issues that matter to them. And of course, every single day this goes on, a really bad Labor government is getting off scot-free with basically putting fuel on the economic fire in terms of government spending and inflation.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And you've got a lot to unpack here because one of the things we're seeing is this divide where with the treatment of the Nats as this sort of, you know, very junior party in the sin bin, the naughty kids, go off to the naughty corner here with you, sent by Susan Lee. It's developing this real narrative that there is, in fact, a much greater divide between these two parties than there needs to be. It is actually worsening the situation on the right. Forget about One Nation for a moment. Forget about Paul Kelly's column today for a moment. Every time they start going down this road where they say, oh, well, you know, we're the responsible ones and they're the naughty ones, they are driving conservatives further and further away from any sort of center-right coalition. And then, as you say here, Peta, the blue murder that Labor is getting away with. I mean, I watched Question Time today, and there was so much gaslighting going on. I thought the fire alarms were going to go off in the House of Representatives. You know, this whole line that Jim Chalmers does without anybody taking him to task for it, where he says, oh, well, you know, if you look at what the notes say, it was the private spending that was pushing the economy, not the government spending. Well, of course, it's because you're handing money to people to go spend on everything from solar and battery subsidies to electricity rebates to, you know, student debt relief and all of these things. The government is just juicing this economy. They're getting away with it, and it is disgraceful. And for the Libs and the Nats to be fighting like this, and for the Nats to be treated in this way, and then for there to be some expectation that they'll come tail between their legs and, you know, reconcile, I'm sorry, I just don't buy that.
Yeah, well, read The Australian tomorrow because I respond to Paul Kelly's claim. You know, people think I want the Libs to somehow go to the far right. I don't. I'd actually like them just to come away from the left, back to the right, back to where they used to be. They've been a long way away from the right. They've left a space for Pauline Hanson. She has shifted to the centre-right middle, to where, you know, people like Howard and Tony Abbott prosecuted election wins from. And I think it's going to leave the Liberals, unfortunately, homeless unless they take this ground back, and they take it back on policy. It's not the revolving door of leadership that fixes a mess like this. And Dan, what worries me too, I mean, we've got 2 state elections coming up, one in South Australia, obviously one in Victoria, and Labor's going to spend big. And when the RBA governor talks about rampant out of control government spending, she's not just referring to Jim Chalmers and Jimflation. She's talking about the terrible debt in Victoria. And Labor here, under Jacinta Allen, will do what Dan Andrews did. They'll throw money at everything to try and win in November. That's the problem.
It is, and the same is the case in South Australia, where debt is ramping up big time, and big spending promises, particularly on housing, where Albanese was the other day to make another housing commitment on behalf of the long-suffering taxpayers of Australia. But obviously government spending is one of the key drivers of the inflationary problem we have. And we've talked about this a couple of times before. The only way the country is going to get out of these economic problems that we have is either through cutting spending or growing the economy. And this government does not have a growth agenda. It has a redistributionist agenda. It has no pro-economic growth policies whatsoever. Contrast that to Hawke and Keating, who, for all of the faults of their governments, at least understood that you've got to grow the economy, because if you grow the economy, you'll get more tax revenue without having to increase tax rates or introduce new taxes, because a bigger economy means you have a larger revenue base. So you're going to get more revenue. If you want to put that into spending, you can do it. If you want to put that into tax cuts, you can do it. Or if you want to pay down the debt, you can do it. So look, number one is to get the economy growing. But, you know, all this government is talking about is raising taxes and shifting deck chairs around the economic Titanic, rather than, you know, getting the whole ocean to float to a higher level, so everybody will benefit. And that's the issue we face.
And, you know, case in point, they're going to go after capital gains tax. None of the guys asked about it today from the Labor front bench could rule that out. They call it reform. It's never reform. They never grow the pie, as Dan's suggesting. They just carve it up a different way. And you at home who work really hard, particularly if you're middle class, you just get a smaller and smaller slice of that pie. And then we get that revelation too, James, about their net zero fund, a $5 billion fund. And the financing rate of return on projects is something like 1%. Like, it's just stuff that doesn't stack up commercially is now left for the poor old taxpayer to cover.
And, you know, Peta, there's something really sinister going on here, because you can start to see some of the hints being dropped around what's going to come in that budget, not only with the non-answers from people today, but also some hints and some columnists who are connected more to Labor about what they're going after. They're going to go after capital gains tax rebates on investment properties and probably on the family home as well. They'll put some sort of indexation or threshold on it and call it fairness. And it actually ties in with these environmental funds, you know, they're earning non-commercial rates of return, and the fact that they want the super, they want your super now to start to invest in these things, that they call it a nation-building project, Peta, which of course means we're going to use your money to invest in some boondoggle that doesn't make money. Because in both circumstances, you know, whether you have an investment property or a family home or a nice pile of super that you've worked hard to accumulate, it all comes back to the Albanese philosophy. And he can talk like a centrist all he wants, but this is the man who likes to fight Tories. And to him, a Tory is anybody who has put together some sort of investment portfolio, you know, not having $100 million, not living in Point Piper next to Malcolm Turnbull, but just anybody who has got the sort of cash and wherewithal to take care of themselves. They hate that. That is what they're attacking here. It's not growing the pie so people are more self-sufficient. The only way Labour's fortunes go is if people are dependent on the government, and that's what all of this ties around to.
The whole philosophy is to drag everyone to the same level. Lowest common denominator, make you as dependent as possible on the state, and then you're beholden every election, whether you like it or not, to vote for Labor just to financially survive. That's the long game, and they're playing the Libs off a break. I'll leave it there. Gents, thank you. James and Dan Wilde.